When you pick up a book that claims to bridge forensic science, statistical analysis, and biblical theology, you expect either a breakthrough or a breakdown. Dallas James's The Transphysical Testimony, Volume 2, 19 Witnesses does neither. Instead, it does something far more deliberate. It builds a laboratory. It runs an experiment. And it invites you to look at the data before you draw a conclusion. This 2026 volume is the second installment in a series that treats the Shroud of Turin not as a medieval relic to be defended or dismissed, but as a forensic witness to be interrogated through a highly structured, pre-registered statistical protocol applied to a 34,000-verse biblical corpus. If that sounds like an unconventional marriage of disciplines, that is exactly the point. James is not writing apologetic. He is running a field test. Volume 1 laid the architecture. Volume 2 is the execution. Across 2 days in April 2026, James conducted 19 independent draws from the Urim Thummim version, a complete biblical translation that serves as the sampling field for his Shield 14.0 protocol. Each draw was pre-registered. The question was locked. The keyword criteria were set. The timestamp was recorded. Only then did the cryptographic entropy engine select 100 verses. The analytical pipeline then processed those verses through multiple deterministic channels, measuring identity markers, inheritance signals, priestly concentrations, polarity balance, and convergence confidence. The verdicts were generated before any interpretation was written. This is not post hoc pattern matching. This is confirmatory discipline dressed in statistical clothing. James explicitly separates exploratory analysis from confirmatory testing, and he enforces that boundary at the protocol level. You do not get to choose which draws make it into the book after seeing the results. All 19 are reported. The neutral verdicts sit alongside the strongest affirmatives with equal prominence. That is the discipline. The results are where the book becomes genuinely arresting. Out of 19 draws, 13 returned affirmative or leaning yes verdicts. 2 returned neutral. 0 returned negative. Every single draw cleared extreme anomaly thresholds on the guidance detection indicator. The aggregate Fisher combined probability drops below 1 in 10 to the 50th under a null hypothesis of random sampling. James is careful to state what this does not mean. The protocol does not measure divine causation. It does not claim to prove the shroud's authenticity. What it does claim is this: when you ask the biblical corpus-specific, pre-registered questions about the shroud's theological and forensic dimensions, the statistical signal departs from noise at a level that conventional significance testing cannot distinguish from zero. The corpus, under prayer-guided sampling, is doing something. The reader is left to decide what that something is. The 19 inquiries are organized into 7 distinct tiers, each addressing a different facet of the shroud question. Tier 1 tackles atonement mechanism. Here the book delivers what may be its most theologically significant finding. When James asked whether a punitive, dosimetric model of wrath governed the body on the linen, the corpus returned a neutral verdict. It did not deny it. It simply declined the framing. But when the same theological territory was approached through the grammar of the caprith, the mercy seat covering above the ark, the verdict shifted to strong anomaly and affirmative. The corpus, James argues, prefers propitiatory covering over penal measurement. It substitutes covenant grammar for courtroom grammar. Tier 2 moves into typological identity, testing whether the shroud aligns with Isaiah 53, the rejected cornerstone pattern, and the servant's silence. Again, when questions are framed in later theological vocabulary, the corpus leans neutral. When framed in its own narrative architecture, it affirms. The pattern is consistent. The text speaks strongest when asked in its own language. Tier 3 brings in the forensic science. James tests whether Paulo de Lazaro's vacuum ultraviolet corona discharge model corresponds to the Hebrew verb for divine radiance, whether John Sottosanti's dental observations align with covenantal identity confirmation, and whether John Jackson's cloth collapse theory fits the scriptural pattern of transphysical bodies passing through matter. The verdicts here are leaning yes and exploratory, not confirmatory. James respects the boundary between statistical anomaly and mechanical proof. He lets the science remain science and lets the corpus remain scripture. The draw does not validate laboratory methodology. It validates theological correspondence. Tier 4 is the thermodynamic hinge. It examines the silver cord from Ecclesiastes 12, asking whether its severance at death released the radiant energy that imprinted the linen, and whether its reconnection at resurrection triggered the transphysical transition. This tier produces the highest polarity balance index in the entire volume, a 100% affirmative probability on the reconnection draw. It is the statistical apex of the book, anchoring the resurrection not as a reversal of death, but as a transition into a different mode of embodiment. Tiers 5 through 7 push the inquiry into wisdom literature, eschatological covenant, and grief continuum. Draw 14 and 15 test whether Job's blameless designation connects typologically to the unmarred body on the linen. The result is a strong anomaly with a dense cluster of direct textual hits. The sapiential axis, often sidelined in shroud discussions, emerges as a legitimate witness to the marred and vindicated Messiah. Tier 6 places the shroud inside the Segula framework, identifying it as a covenant witness prepared for the treasured possession remnant before the New Jerusalem. The burial linen is traced to the wedding linen of Revelation 19, turning a weaver's beam of death into a loom of eternal glory. Tier 7 closes the loop with the Bochum continuum, testing whether the weeping at Judges 2 and the weeping at the tomb in John 11 represent the same covenant grief spectrum expressed at different intensities. The corpus affirms it. The continuum moves from proposed framework to statistically anchored reality. What makes this volume stand out is not its conclusions, but its discipline. James refuses to cherry-pick. The two neutral verdicts are given the same prominence as the strongest affirmatives. He explicitly states what the protocol cannot claim. He separates statistical anomaly from causal attribution. He respects preregistration as a safeguard against confirmation bias. And he consistently yields to the corpus's own grammar rather than forcing later theological systems onto the text. For readers accustomed to devotional certainty or skeptical dismissal, this methodological restraint will feel either refreshing or frustrating. For readers interested in the intersection of computational theology, forensic history, and covenantal hermeneutics, it is a landmark experiment. The book is not without its demands. The statistical terminology requires patience. The protocol's architecture assumes familiarity with concepts like the polarity balance index and the convergence confidence index. The appendices are dense, and the draw-by-draw metrics are presented without hand-holding. Yet this density is precisely what gives the work its credibility. James is not simplifying to persuade. He is reporting to document. The three synthesis chapters at the end pull the threads together, showing how shared verses anchor multiple draws, how the aggregate probability defies chance, and why the corpus's refusal to affirm punitive atonement is the most theologically consequential finding in the set. Volume 2 does not end with a proof. It ends with a witness. 19 witnesses, arranged across 7 tiers, producing a probability field that converges on a single claim, the shroud, if read through the grammar of the biblical corpus under disciplined statistical inquiry, bears a signal that cannot be explained by noise. Whether that signal is statistical artifact, per-guided convergence, or forensic residue of a transphysical event remains, as James insists, the reader's inference. But the data is on the table. The methodology is transparent. The discipline is intact. For anyone willing to sit with the numbers, to respect the preregistration, and to listen to what the corpus actually says rather than what we expect it to say, this volume is essential reading. It is a quiet revolution in how we might approach ancient texts, physical evidence, and the space between them.